Hey there, guys. All right, today we are tackling a topic that we have talked about before, covered on other channels, but I do not believe we have watched this one from History Matters, and that is on how dark were the Dark Ages, a short animated documentary. Now, of course, I have said this before, but my personal, I believe that the term, now I've heard that I have had the term spoken to me, the Dark Ages, as an outdated term. I disagree with that, and specifically, this was a teacher who was also this is a professor at my school, at my university. Now, I did not tell them that I disagreed with them, but this is a professor at my university who literally was a professor of like the same period of time in which I was pursuing writing my thesis in. They were just across the English Channel from me. I did the Anglo-Saxons. They were a professor of like Frankish history or something like that. Um, I personally believe now, of course, there are parts, right? There's a Greek Dark Age, right? In the BCE era, and then of course there's probably like a Chinese Dark Age. So I think, of course, when you say Dark Age, you say, um, if you just say now, of course, the Dark Age, a lot of people will just attribute that to this specific Dark Age. But I think if we were to just say it, the European Dark Age would be fine. Now, of course, again, right, the Greek Dark Age, Greeks are a part of Europe. So of course there are still problems with it. So it is still a problematic sort of term to use, but I don't think it's necessarily an outdated term. I do think it is accurate to apply this to Western Europe post fall of Rome. I think because, right, if we now, of course, there are definitely parts of the socioeconomic world that they were living in that are both better and worse than what they had been in Roman times, right? There was immense wealth inequality during the late Roman period, which did get somewhat better when it collapsed, right? Because I think wealth inequality did get a little bit better post fall of Rome. Um, but right there were other like the lack of inter-European connection was now gone with the collapse of the Roman power, of the Roman state, right? So actually, you know what? Maybe Dark Ages is a term we shouldn't use anymore. The more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm saying it right now, the more I'm like, you know what? Maybe it is a term we shouldn't be using because it's just like you gotta be so specific on what exactly you are meaning. There's got to be context involved that really it just undermines. Well, anyways, let's dive in.
We've all heard of the term Dark Ages, that medieval period in which all learning stopped and everything became terrible. It's a term attributed
Okay, yeah, if we're that's definitely how it is first said to people when they're first learning about the Dark Ages, kind of.
to Petrarch, who, like later Renaissance thinkers, thought that the Middle Ages were a period of darkness in comparison to the classical period from before and the Renaissance after. So just to let you know, the definition of Dark Ages has changed since the days of Petrarch.
Yep,
Nowadays, it's a very specific term, but be aware that Dark Ages isn't synonymous with Middle Ages. It
yep.
refers exclusively to Western Europe in the couple of centuries following the
Yeah,
collapse of the Roman
I
Empire.
said that
Of
kind of.
course, the question is, how true is the commonly held vision of this period? Were the Dark Ages really that dark and unenlightened?
Hmm.
Well, in a word, no. In a sentence, not really, but also a little bit, depending on where and where you're talking about.
Exactly as I was just saying.
So, Western Europe had largely been united under the rule of the
Like, and I think I specifically have said that if you look at, I think it is entirely accurate to call it a dark age. If you look at Britain post fall of Rome, or really I believe it was Hadrian. No, it wasn't Hadrian. Honorius, Emperor Honorius. I think it was some emperor with an H. Evacuated, uh, Roman exodus. Cities were essentially left to do what they do. Um, I would say applying the Dark Ages fits very well into Britain because then, especially once the Germanic peoples start migrating over, you have a lot of war. You have a new power structure being established. You have the native Britons and the Romano Britons that had been living there, kind of now becoming the underclass. no longer the people in power. Right now, it's the Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, and probably again there's probably more Germanic tribes in that it's just the popular stories. We love our rule of three. So probably more Germanic tribes in that mix, but the Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, specifically, and of course the term we know best, the Anglo-Saxons, I think you can apply that. And then it also is very much a Christian sort of term because, again, right, this kind of is applied to like our modern way of labeling the Dark Ages is especially when applying it here to Britain as I am, is applying it to a world in which Christianity, in a place where Christianity was present and then state collapsed, pagan Germans moved in, and then the Dark Ages seem to be over in a lot of people's minds once the pagans converted to Christianity and Christianity was brought back to Britain. But also, I think it's a fair term to apply, especially to Britain in this point in those like 200 to 300 years from fall of Rome to about the 800s. Just because we lack like a lot of we have no like primary sources of Britain from that period of time. There are some, very very few. Like we compare the amount of sources available pre that period and post that period, there is a very noticeable like, hey, we don't got sources here. Anyways.
The Roman Empire, and after its collapse it was divided into competing realms. There's obviously too many to speak of in any sort of detail, so we'll pick two extremes and compare them. The former province of Italia and that of Britannia, whose experiences of the Dark Ages are proof that they weren't quite as awful as it's often made out to be. So in Britannia, after the Romans left, things went really well. Just kidding, they fell apart almost immediately. Things like a coin-based economy, urban living...
I was like, wait a minute, I know this stuff. They did not do well. They had a complete socio-economic collapse. Like, I think the best example that I can think of that that it would be the easiest to like imagine how it was like kind of a post-apocalyptic world. It's pretty much kind of how it was. At least that's how I've had it described to me in the books I've read by that's how a lot of modern historians make it sound. That's how bad they make the socioeconomic collapse of Britain sound. That it was essentially post-apocalyptic. Like, chaos everywhere.
And literacy died out there within a generation. Whereas in places like the Ostrogothic kingdom, which occupied the former province of Italia and then some, very little changed. And whilst, yes, it did now have a Germanic ruler, King Theodoric, he swore fealty to the Roman Emperor in the east. The Senate continued to meet in Rome and the Pope's rights were respected, although the official church of the Ostrogoths was centred in Ravenna. As for urban living, the number of people in towns and cities had declined massively in most places. Rome's population had declined from roughly 1 million people in the 3rd century to about 50,000 during the Ostrogothic period. But what about the peasantry? How did life change for them after Rome had gone? Well, frankly, not very much. Most people were born, lived and died working as agricultural labourers on the same farm as their forebears had. Localised famines were also much more common and couldn't be alleviated by a centralised authority, meaning that local starvation was much more common. This largely went away in Ostrogothic Italy when it was conquered in the 6th century by the Eastern Roman Empire, known then as the Roman Empire, which undermines Petrarch's notion of the post-Roman world being an unenlightened one because the Romans never went away. The Dark Ages did see many intellectual achievements though. Monasteries like Lindisfarne and Monk Wearmouth Jarrow produced great historians like Bede. In the Ostrogothic kingdom, Boethius wrote the Consolation of Philosophy, which is one of the most important medieval texts ever written. And in terms of architecture, buildings like Theodoric's mausoleum are testament to the fact that in the Dark Ages, things weren't as dark as they may seem. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
Okay, and that was How Dark Were the Dark Ages, a short animated documentary by History Matters. Now, this was actually, I feel like, a weak video by History Matters, and maybe it is because of my, this is a period in time in which that I actively studied a lot about, because, right, my period of time in which I studied was specifically, for being very specific about what I wrote my thesis on, late 800s Anglo-Saxon England, right? specifically the Kingdom of Wessex, under Alfred the Great. And so this is something that I know a lot about, and maybe that is why this video feels a bit weaker to me than other History Matters videos, because in the other ones, I don't know as much. But here, I don't know, it did feel like he was leaving a lot of the context that he normally puts in, was missing. Now, I think this video might be a bit one of the much older videos, specifically if we're just looking at the patrons here. This ain't that many patrons. Not what I'm used to seeing from History Minute. So I think this is an indicative of how old the video is here. But I'd say it's not bad. Not bad for a 2.5 minute video on the period. I mean, it gets the point across, I think, that I wanted to get. But I do think that modern History Matters could do a much better job than what this video is. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.